now. Yeah, welcome everyone for making time for this monthly talk series on behalf of SSTN, Safe and Sustainable Travel Nepal. We are doing series number 6, and it's this special series about creating the walking communities, and then we are having one of the renowned person in New Zealand about how to make communities safer to walk. And so I'll be going through a couple of slides introducing SSTN to Jeanette and other wider people, and also a little bit introduction about Jeanette and where she come from, and she will take the platform after that. So yes, as I said, this is the series number monthly talk series that SSTN is organizing, and today we are talking about the creating walking communities. And the agenda for today is I'll talk a little bit about the SSTN and something about housekeeping and introduction to Jeanette, and then hand over to Jeanette about her presentation. And if we have any questions, we have question and answer session at the end. Before wrapping up, we have chairman's remark, but just keep in mind, Hemant is in hospital with his relatives, so he may not be able to join us, but see how it goes, and we'll go from there. So a little bit about housekeeping. Like if you want to ask any questions, just raise your hand, or just drop your question in the chat, and then we'll pass that through to Jeanette. And if we cannot answer every questions that we get today, we will try to get back to you after the session as well. Yep, so a little bit introduction about the Safe and Sustainable Travel Nepal. It's an voluntary non-profit organization established in 2016 in Nepal, and we basically work around road safety, and also in the road safety we do the awareness campaign all over the country in the 7 provinces every year, and we do capacity building type of work, which is the reason we are here today, to understand what the developing countries are doing in terms of making the footpaths and then the walking facilities safer, and what we lack in terms of the developing countries like Nepal, what we lack and where we can get benefits from, likes of Jeanette. And we also do the research and some advocacy. We started doing some research work last year, but because of the COVID happening as a pandemic all around the globe, we stopped that, and we will be starting that back again in the future, maybe next year. And here comes Jeanette Ward. She is here to talk about creating walkable communities, and she is one of the technical directors in Ably consultant in New Zealand, and she is award-winning transport engineer, especially in the space of walking, cycling, and also she has wider experience around the detailed design, road safety audit, all those things, but she's specializing in the walking, cycling, road safety. And then she's one of the lead consulting engineer working with the Wakakotahi for the new pedestrian network design guidelines. And I saw that it's called now PPDG, and she'll talk about that, I think, a little bit. And then she is also involved in many other road controlling authorities around the New Zealand. And also we could see some inputs from her in the Off-road and all those sort of thing, but it's specialized in walking, cycling. And I will hand over the platform to you, Jeanette, and then you are good to go. I'll get off the screen. How do I get off? Stop sharing. Okay. So the platform is yours, Jeanette, and you can take off.
So it's been great, working with Vishnu since he joined us at Abley, and I was very thrilled when he asked me to do this. I love kind of spreading the word about trying to make our communities better for walking. So this is really, really great that I can do this tonight as in New Zealand time. So tonight I am going to run through some context. So that's around the role of walking in our communities, and talk a little bit about what I understand of the situation in Nepal. Apologies, I have never been to Nepal, but I've been stalking a few places on Street View, trying to get a feel for what the streets are like, and doing a little bit of research into your safety statistics. And then I'm going to talk to you about the guidance that we use as practitioners in Australasia to help us plan and design for the pedestrian environment. And I'll talk a little bit about one particular tool that we've helped Walkable, which is the name that Vishnu's mentioned, but that's our New Zealand Road Authority. And then we'll just have a chat, I guess, about how can this apply in Nepal, what could be done in Nepal. So obviously I'll chuck a lot of ideas into the mix, and then we can have a discussion about, is that something that could be achieved in Nepal? When I show you some photos of the New Zealand environment shortly, you may look at them and go, where the heck is everybody? It looks pretty empty. Some of the photos I actually took during lockdown, so there wasn't many people around. But in other photos, it does kind of reflect, for us, a lack of walking. So our problem in New Zealand is really a lack of walking, compared to it being a major safety problem. It's probably that perceived, it's not a very nice place to walk sometimes. Our cities are quite nice to walk in, but people walking from their residential homes into the cities, it's not their preferred mode for a number of reasons. But hopefully you'll get a vibe for what New Zealand's like in the walking context as we go through. So most journeys have an element of walking. So you will have hopefully heard of the term last mile, first mile. So often that could apply to, you're walking to your car, and then you drive your car, and then you walk from your car to your destination. So the first part and the last part of your journey has been walking, and that could be on a scooter or a bicycle or anything. You always end up doing some kind of walking as part of that trip. And it does form sort of like a key role in our transport system, particularly in conjunction with public transport. We can move a lot more people by walking. When you will have seen those diagrams in the past, where you look at the space taken up by one person in one car versus how many people could be in that space. It's just about planning our cities better. And in New Zealand, we have very low density residential, which is quite different to the towns and cities that you have in Nepal, where there are a lot more people living closer to facilities. So you've got a lot more people walking to do their daily business than we do here in New Zealand. And we're trying to turn that round by getting our spatial planning better, but it's taking time. So I probably don't need to tell you these as well, but there are definite benefits to walking. There's our health. So it's integrating physical activity into our daily lives. It's better for the environment, of course, and it's cheap. So we're not spending any money on a vehicle or a bus. We're actually doing something that's very free to access. And it creates a sense of community. So a lot of people walk so that they can go and meet people and get that social interaction with others, even if it is strangers, particularly people who are isolated, living at home. for whatever reason, it's a way to get out and meet everybody. And that does mean that it's available to everybody. We'll talk soon about the types of pedestrians, but even someone like the lady there in an electric wheelchair, she's considered a pedestrian, and therefore for her to be able to get out and about is really important. And it really comes down to the fact that great walking environments create livable places. And there's a particularly good quote here from a planner in America that says, if you plan cities for cars and traffic, you get cars and traffic. If you plan for people and places, you get people and places. So I think that sums up quite nicely the kind of journey that all of us are on. That's why you're here tonight, because this is the kind of, you want to plan for people and places. And if we do that, that's what we hope to get. So I found some statistics on the World Bank Group website. I'm not sure what year this applies to, but it really drilled home to me that you have a lot of pedestrians killed on the roads in Nepal. I couldn't find any statistics of how those fatalities occur, but my guessings are that you have some crossings that are potentially dangerous. There are footpaths that don't exist in some areas, and I really liked that photo that Jeanette sent through to put on the front cover. The first slide I showed you, where a new footpath was being built to, create that, route for pedestrians, so they don't have to walk on the side of the road and risk being taken out. So having this many people die on our roads, and this is a huge cost to society. So this is the same photo Vishnu had before, but it's a kind of compilation of challenging footpath environments, which I'm not sure if that's a day-to-day sort of thing that people encounter, but blockages, being used for the display of goods. I'm not sure what's going on with that wire fencing, cars parked in the front, bicycles blocking the footpath, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of things that can be improved to help make your communities more walkable. I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about pedestrians and the types of pedestrians and their needs, because whenever we do some training about providing for pedestrians, we always take it back to first principles, like what do people need out there in their walking environment? And to know that, you've got to understand the range of pedestrians and their needs. So in Australasia, at least, we classify pedestrians as people on foot, people with a disability, people in or on wheeled recreation devices. So that's our skateboards, scooters, and I'm not sure whether you're seeing the e-scooters pop up in your communities like we are in New Zealand, but they are definitely all over the place now. And then there's also motorised mobility devices. So that previous slide where a lady was in an electric wheelchair, that's a mobility device for her. A lot of older citizens here in New Zealand use mobility scooters, which are a bit different to a wheelchair. They're more like they look like a bit like a ride-on lawnmower, and that helps them get out and about in the community. But as you'll see shortly, if you have a challenging environment for people using wheels, it can really, put blockages in their way. But there's also toys, so some children on tricycles and similar, but does not include people on bicycles because they are classified as cyclists. So just talking about older pedestrians. So as we get older, we have a decrease in our agility and our balance and our stability. And that can cause problems when you have changing levels So for example, if you're encountering steps and ramps, the surface quality of the footpath might be uneven, some gradients, curb heights, handrails. So handrails are quite good for helping address those. You know, if there's a crossing point, it's quite nice to have a handrail to hold on to before you cross over to get your balance. You also develop a reduced range of joint motion, which can then mean that you are walking slower than younger people. So that means when you get to a crossing facility, it's quite daunting knowing that you've got all that way to go and you know that you're going to be slower. And it also means that older people don't walk for as long a distance as younger people. So here's an example of a footpath somewhere in Kathmandu. I can't remember the street name, but as I was sort of trolling around, I saw that this kind of scene was quite common, where you have these concrete, I think these are the stormwater system underneath, if it's like what I've encountered in Indonesia. So these can often become uneven and cause tripping hazards for older people. And to be fair, younger people as well who might be on their phones. So distracted pedestrians, I'm not going to talk too much about them tonight, but there are another, I guess, phenomena that they're experiencing is that people are walking around with their heads down looking at phones a lot, and therefore the surface of the footpath is important for them as well. So people with a disability can have mobility issues, and this includes a temporary mobility. So the photo there is someone who's injured their leg. So that might come right over time, but in the meantime, they have a mobility issue which requires them to use a mobility aid. And that definitely means that that footpath surface is going to need to be good. They need a bit more width if they are actually in a wheelchair during that that disability, but we'll talk a bit more about wheels in a minute. So when you've got a crutch, obviously the base of that crutch could be caught in things, so you've got to be careful with grates and gaps and things as well. And it also means that you have reduced stamina, so you get tired quicker, and therefore you need more brakes. So it's quite good to have seats along a footpath. Not every footpath, but when you have quite common, I guess, popular footpaths that people are using to get to a shopping area, for example, having a seat every now and again is quite useful. And then we also have people that have a disability from a sensory point of view. So this could be a vision impairment. So they're either blind or partially blind, and they might be using a cane or a guide dog. So they need really good streetscape legibility. So being able to negotiate that by having, for example, a clear path. Tactile paving. That's also very helpful to have people, when their cane goes over it, they know that there's a crossing point, for example, because the tactile pavers are there to warn them of a change. And also reduced hearing ability. So, that's another really tricky one, because obviously they're not able to hear the traffic coming, etc. But interestingly, as we move to more electric cars, not being able to hear the traffic is going to happen to us all, because the other day I was crossing the road and I didn't hear an EV coming along because it's just so quiet, and I was like, oh, there's a car there, I didn't know that. So people who have hearing disability need more visual information. So here's what I was talking about in terms of wheeled devices. So if you encounter some kind of gradient, then you're going to be susceptible to gravity and need to brake more, etc. And it's quite tiring. So gradients are really important, and also how they interact with walking pedestrians, and that usually comes down to making sure that you have enough space for a person, maybe two people walking in a wheelchair, which generally means around at least 2 meters of footpath width. Because the user is seated, their eye level is lower, so it's very similar to a child in terms of, what they can see is a lot lower down. So when you have traffic signals, you need to think about where the push buttons are located and the position of signs and things like that. So here's another example from Kathmandu where the zebra crossing is nice and clear and visible, but if you're in a wheelchair and you got to that left-hand side, you're going to have a bit of a problem getting up onto the curb. It's going to take a bit of effort, may not be possible, you might have to turn around and head back. So those kinds of things are really important for people with wheeled devices. So those are a bit of a context, and I'm sure that none of that was news to you, but it just really helps set the scene for, I guess, some of the things I'm going to talk about tonight. The other consideration it's good to think about is that people using footpaths can vary in terms of their speed. So we've talked about a lot of different users, and we've got bikes and e-bikes on that particular image there, because even though it may not be allowed in terms of the law, sometimes you do encounter bikes and e-bikes on the footpath, and that's when you start getting that really high speed differential. But e-scooters, they can rattle along, got say 25 k's there. It's feasible as well for e-scooters. So that kind of environment there's another example where you've got a lot of people walking, and then these chaps aren't even on that graph, but they're motorcycles. So that may all work very well, and they may be courteous, but it's just that there is that speed differential to think about when you are looking at an area in terms of how you want to improve it or reduce safety issues there, which may be related to conflicts between the various users. And then the classic kind of risk to pedestrians is being hit by vehicles, and it's really important to understand the physics of this, and I think as practitioners we do, and the challenge really is to get the community to buy into this concept. Well, it's not a concept, it's real, it's physics, and this graph shows it quite clearly that when you are hit at a certain speed, what kind of risk of death or severe injury you could encounter. So this is why in New Zealand we have a real focus on keeping some streets where there's lots of people. So in our town centres and cities where people are the priority, we want to keep the speeds 30 or lower. So that kind of, as soon as you get into that pink zone, that's when your chances of survival are lower. And I actually used this graph not so long ago to convince some councillors in a little town that I was helping put a 30k speed limit in their town centre, and some members of the community said, oh no, 30's too slow, we want 40. And this councillor said, well hang on, I'm looking at a graph here that tells me that if I'm hit at 40, I've got way more chance of dying than I would if I was hit at 30. So that was a really sort of excellent moment as a practitioner to have an elected member, really get that in their head and then push back on some members of the community that wanted to drive around a little bit faster. So I was trying to get a feel for what speed limits you have in Nepal, and I found this table which indicates that in your urban areas you have 40 km/h speed limits, and rural and motorways 80 km/h. So in terms of speed limits, you know, that's really ahead of a lot of countries. Most of our urban roads in New Zealand are 50, unless you're getting into that really dense city areas. But, you know, it's all very well having a speed limit. I don't know how good the compliance with those speed limits is in Nepal, but it is a challenge in New Zealand as well when we put in 30k speed areas. If we haven't got the design of the street right, then people will go faster than 30 k's because it just feels, you know, more natural to not travel at 30. I see that you've had some talks this year from various people about the Love 30 campaign, which is a really awesome campaign, and you know, it's great that those conversations look like they've already started in Nepal as well. So guidance and tools. Guidance is usually kind of in a number of tiers. So you have your national level, and Vishnu pointed me in the direction of the NRS documents. And sometimes there is also state or local level guidance. That certainly is how it works in Australia and New Zealand. I'm not sure about Nepal. But international guidance may also be helpful. Because when it comes to providing for pedestrians, it's the same issues all around the world. We want to get people across the road safer, and we want to create space for them to be able to move around. And sometimes looking at some international guidance may be helpful. That planning for walking toolkit there from London, that's actually really useful. And when we developed the guidance here in New Zealand, we made a reference to that. Tools are really useful as well. So I'm going to talk to you about a pedestrian level of service tool that we have in New Zealand. But essentially that is a way of rating a street, and then you might then rate the design that you're looking at to compare them and to see how much you've improved the environment. But in terms of Australasian guidance, we have a few things at our fingertips. We have the Austroads guides, which you'll be aware of, and they are, there's actually 3 series. There's the Guide to Traffic Management, Guide to Road Design, and Guide to Road Safety. I put these 2 up here because in terms of the URL is there. And obviously I will send a copy of these slides to you. So when you want to go back and look at this stuff, then you'll have these references. I've also got on the last slide links to another whole range of training webinars that might be useful. So I will make sure I get that to you soon. So in terms of tools, this pedestrian level of service tool, again, you'll be able to click on this hyperlink when you get the PDF, but we spent a lot of time thinking about all the things that contribute to the level of service for walking. So we're all familiar with motor vehicle levels of service. That has been well established over the years and is very much based on our kind of delay and things like that you can measure. But when it comes to walking, there's so much more to it than just how much time someone spends or how much they're delayed. It's about how pleasant and attractive the environment is, because if it's grim, it's less likely that a person will want to walk there. And safety is also a really big part of this. So we've got safe from vehicles and safe and appropriate crossings for people to cross the road. And then our high quality paths, so that's paths where people can't trip, where they can access the path through various curb cut downs, etc. And then lastly, secure. So secure is about personal safety. So I don't know if you use the term SSTN in Nepal, but that is CPTED, which stands for Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. And essentially, when people design a road or any kind of public space, we assess it against some principles of SSTN, and that includes things like can the place be overlooked by others, particularly at night? So if you're walking there, there's eyes on the street, so to speak, so people can actually see you and you're not isolated behind something. So all of those things are used in a tool where you can go in and work through a range of questions, and then that will give you a result. So on the right there we have a comparison of an existing street, which is the blue line, and then comparing what the design was, and you can see it's like a spider web and you get improvements in certain areas. So it looks like the high quality paths got a massive boost, and so did the appropriate crossings, but the other things were actually already not too bad. If you are familiar with the Healthy Streets tool that they use in London, that's a very similar type of graphic that tool produces as well. So that particular tool, the Healthy Streets, was one of the background, I guess, research that went into this particular tool as well. But it's taken it more to an appropriate situation for New Zealand. And if you do have a look at that report at some time, you might see some things that do apply to Nepal, but there might be other things where you go, well, that's not as important here. So it's always about the context and what's appropriate for a particular country. So what we've found through updating guidance over the years, both for the New Zealand guidance and the Austroads guidance, there's a couple of key things that have come through. So lower speeds, that is huge now. Everyone is totally bought into that. And like I described earlier, even politicians can understand that concept. You don't need to be, a transport engineer, it's physics. Providing safe, obvious and step-free environments. So that's kind of like a mantra. We call it SOS, and really that's just working through everything you're doing and checking those two things. Is it safe? Is it obvious? And is it step-free? And if you can get those three right, then you probably nailed it for everybody. And the other thing that's changed in recent years has been really clear on providing wide, clear footpath zones so that people can get through with wheeled devices, etc. And that's really thinking about where things like street trees might be placed. One thing I noticed when I was using Street View in Kathmandu was looks like there's been a really big push to plant more street trees, which is fantastic. And it's just about thinking about where those go in terms of the footpath space. But having those street trees are going to contribute to so many positive things for the street in terms of shade. It's going to make it more attractive, and it's better for the environment. And then another thing there I've got is the application of those SSTN principles, so those principles around personal security. And also the use of tactical urbanism. So I'm sure you've all heard of this term. It's a very international phenomenon where so many countries, particularly during their COVID lockdowns, really embraced the concept of trialing things, putting temporary things on the street to see how they go. And that can be as, I guess, temporary as road cones or hit sticks or things like that. Or that example there on the right is a wooden structure called a parklet, and it's trialling whether having that in a car park space is a better use of the space than parking. So in that particular town, they, asked people who happened to be walking past or sat down and had a rest, what do you think of this? So those kinds of structures can be moved around and trialled in different places. And finally, just a really, big promotion of better construction and maintenance practices for walking, because it's all very well if we get our planning and design right, but actually when they go to construct it or maintain it, that's when it can often not come out how you thought it would. So getting the specifications right for the construction, and then just making sure that things are maintained properly. So in terms of using guidance, there's lots of different things we can use it for. So we've got a lot of growth in our cities, a lot of residential areas being developed, so it's useful for that, or upgrading streets, or things like bridges and lighting replacements and what have you. So I've got a couple of examples here. So this was a railway bridge near me on the left, and that path was very narrow, and I could never see who was coming from the other end, so I didn't feel very safe using it. But you can see that when they replaced the bridge, they actually did a really good job of widening the footpath by just pushing the abutment back when they replaced the bridge. Completely, common sense thing to do, and now I can see who's coming from the other direction. This is just an example of a crossing island on the left that was a bit grim for kids crossing the road. So just some simple additions to how that might work were added, and that's worked out really well. And this is an example of a street renewal where the lighting upgrade was done at the same time, and on the left is the old sodium lighting, and on the right is the LED lighting. You can see how much brighter it is. And those street trees were moved, had bigger gaps between them now, so that you can actually be seen as you walk along that footpath. It was a bit sort of dark and dingy at night and didn't feel safe. So here's these photos where I'm saying there's no one around, but there are actually people in New Zealand. It's just that they were all being good and being in lockdown. Couple of examples there of just, really looking after the footpath space. And if you've got street trees you want to keep, you can do things around the base of those trees without the use of things like tree grates, which reduce the footpath width. And outdoor dining that has the balustrade right down to the base of the footpath so that people with a cane can use it. And here's our lower speed areas. So that's quite common now, seeing the 30Ks entering into city areas, and then tightening up on things like corner radii to keep speeds down. We're doing quite a lot of things in Auckland where Vishnu's located, called shared space streets. So that's making the vehicles are the guest. So you end up with a really high amenity area and just really low speed, usually about 10 k's an hour. And then with the Tactical Urbanism Toolkit, we can do things like trialling closures of roads to make better spaces. And this is our really big push at the moment. So raising zebra crossings. What we're finding is that, having flush zebra crossings and trying to get people to actually notice them, and to also, they can't really go over them at speed. So it helps with the whole kind of calming of the environment as well. So the one on the left is an approach to a roundabout, and the other one is in a town centre area. And raising them just really improves the safety of them. So I'm just going to talk briefly on about what could be done in Nepal, and then I'm just going to open it up for discussion and questions. So I guess political leadership, I'm not sure what that situation is in Nepal, but what we've found here in New Zealand is that if you have really good political leadership, you can get traction on making things better for walking, including, buy into those lower speeds. But we've had a real, I guess, lull in our spending and our focus on walking for the last 10 years, and we've finally come out of that situation, and now we're actually trying to really push walking as a mode. A few years ago it was cycling, which is still an ongoing journey, but walking kind of got left out. I think driver education is also critical, from what I understand talking to Vishnu about driver behaviour in Nepal. It sounds like education, and I know that your group are very hot on that awareness side of things as well. But in terms of infrastructure, so what I really liked in some places in Vietnam, in some of the narrow streets, was closing the street to what they call primitive, only allowing primitive vehicles and walking, so no vehicles with a motor. So you had a certain time of the day where in that area you didn't have the beep 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 or that kind of constant hum. It was a place of kind of peaceful. But then later in the day it opened back up to allow people to do their business on motor scooters or whatever. Better crossings sound like something that is a challenge, and I think when I looked at the number of zebra crossings you have on multi-lane roads as well, that's also a bit of a challenge. That's generally something we advise against, because it's just too much going on for the drivers to understand. But there may be opportunity for you to do raised zebra crossings as well. Providing footpaths in those communities that don't have them, like that very first photo, and I guess working on those smoother footpaths so that you catering for all types of pedestrians. And that's just a very short list. I'm sure there's lots more that can be done, but what I've tried to do tonight is just give you some ideas and examples of what we're doing here in New Zealand. But if you want to have a look at what happens in terms of mid-block crossings, intersections, activity centres, which is really just another way of saying cities and town centres, and also residential areas. There's a range of webinars there that a colleague and I did over the last 2 years. So they're all an hour long. So that's a really good toolkit of training material, including how to measure pedestrians, so survey and audit methods as well. So that's the kind of toolkit of things you might want to do before you set out on your journey of planning or designing. So I'm really happy now to have a chat, take some questions, and yeah, what do you think, Vishnu? Should we do that?
Yeah, that's really great presentation. Thank you, Jeanette, for that. And I think we will circulate the video that we are recording along with those the links that you have provided there. I'll just copy all those and then send it through for people, the interested people, to have a look. And so I think the floor is open for the QA session. Like anybody interested could raise their hand, or like just type the questions through and then I can read through to Jeanette. There was one question from Sandeep Gaikwad from India, and he's asking how local self-government look at pedestrian issues. What is their perception and efforts building infrastructure for pedestrian? Looks like that could be how it's done in New Zealand.
So local government, in terms of our, I guess the way that the country's split up into, we have the main government and then the local government. And to be fair, they probably all approach it in slightly different ways. And some have a bigger focus than others, to be fair. And a lot of it also comes back to how much funding they can get to do things. So I think a lot of them are really proactive. We worked with a small district council recently to come up with a walking action plan, because they actually just wanted a list of things to do. You know, they didn't want to do a strategy or anything. They just wanted, like, tell us what to do, what to fix, and they're just slowly working through the list when they get the money. So that's one council's approach. Other councils will do the big strategy and what have you, and then try and pop out various tasks, but they do tend to approach it and kind of what works for their area. So hopefully
And
that
also,
answers.
yeah, also to add on that one, like countries like Nepal, when something is like going to be constructed or like planned or being designed in the background, and like a lot of people don't know until they go as a construction, like there will be no public consultation going on. So people don't know what's like coming in front of their house until somebody start digging in front of their house, like putting something new for public to use. Yeah, so there is one other question from Prem Lamsal. Yeah, he is saying, how can we determine the size of footpath? Is there any guidance or modeling method to establish relationship between number of pedestrian at peak hour,
Yep.
the width requirement?
Yep, so you can get scientific in some ways through the Fruin method, which looks at the density of pedestrians and therefore the space required, which may be something that could work for Nepal. Because in New Zealand we don't have like masses of pedestrians on footpaths at one time, except maybe in Queen Street in Auckland. What we've done is we've come up with a table of different situations. So we might have a central city area and then we have a minimum width of clear width. So for Queen Street in Auckland, we've said that the footpath clear width should be, I think it's 3.5 metres or 3.5, let's say. But then you can have other stuff that might be where the street trees are. So your overall footpath width might end up being 5 or 6 metres, but we've gone through and worked out what a clear width is for certain situations. But I do know that there are other methods such as the Fruin method around looking at how many pedestrians in that peak hour and therefore what width is required. So that could be something that might be appropriate for when you've got really high density areas with pedestrians.
Yeah, and the second question says like about zebra crossing, how to determine zebra crossing is safe, and is there anything like guidance to measure the performance of the zebra crossing?
So I think with zebra crossings, you really need to just go and watch what is happening. From what I understand, there is often a lack of driver kind of will to stop at pedestrian crossings, and therefore people are like running across them or too scared to use them. So I think really the best way is to go and observe what's happening. You could look at, I don't know how detailed your crash statistics are, but really that's too late if you're starting to look at how many people were injured on it. You need to go and observe it and see what's happening. And as I mentioned before, with multi-lane roads, it's really challenging to have a safe zebra crossing. We often on multi-lane roads use signalised crossings, so we take the whole traffic to a stop with a red light, let the pedestrians cross, and then it's back to the vehicles. That creates other issues around pedestrians wanting to wait, being willing to wait as well. So I think there isn't necessarily any guidelines to evaluate them. It's just looking at how it's working. You could also, what we're doing a lot more now is actually interviewing people that are using them and asking them how did they feel about that zebra crossing. Because there's nothing like that user experience, and the people that use them are our customers, so asking them is a really helpful thing as well.
Yep, and the other question says about that thing we discussed this afternoon. How do we please share experience of jaywalking? Shall be discouraged, controlled?
Yeah, so I was saying to Vishnu that there's a lot of fences alongside the roads in Kathmandu, which I'm assuming are there to stop that jaywalking behaviour, and then occasionally you'll have a gap in it where it might be a driveway or something. So that might be where someone decides to cross. Yeah, it's a really tricky one because there's been a kind of movement around the world around removing barriers for pedestrians and trying to create this barrier-free environment. But generally those because they're adjacent to only roads that have a lane in each direction, not, you know, wide roads. So yeah, it's a really challenging thing to control where people cross, and physical fences are one way to do it, but you're always going to have a gap where people then may decide to do that. Yeah, it's a really, really challenging question to answer without knowing more about your community and what have you. But yeah, I can see how it's been done at the moment, and it's possibly been quite effective. It's just that the crossings that you do provide in between the fencing need to be, you know, really safe.
Just to wrap up the questions there, have we talked about, you know, the total pedestrian crossing width that we apply in the roads in New Zealand, like squeezing, you know, building the curbs, islands to reduce the width, the maximum width? You know, like as you said, in Nepal, there are a lot of streets where there are 4 lanes, meaning like could be 20 meters wide, or like at least 15-14 meter wide, and then you have to cross all the way through. But in New Zealand, we divide that into different pieces, isn't it? Like providing the curb build-outs in the center or on the side.
Yeah, curb build-outs are great, and they do reduce that distance. But it's only feasible if you've got a parking lane or something that you can build into. If you've got just 4 lanes curb to curb, then it's more about thinking about, do you need those 4 lanes?
Yep.
And I don't know what the traffic is like in terms of your peak times and how needed all those lanes are. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. And then other question is from Susmita, and she's asking about how can we improve the existing footpaths for differently abled people? Could be the pedestrian footpath that we are talking, where they had that tactile marking, and then that's going around the utilities cover, something like that.
Yeah, I think if you approached it from the point of view that you're providing for wheeled devices such as wheelchairs, then you'll get it right for everybody, including older pedestrians, because you will have removed any trip hazards. So it's really looking at your footpath. What are the hazards here? What can we improve? And most of the time it is related to either the width or the quality of the surface. And that's from the way that you often see the stormwater under those concrete blocks. That's a bit of a challenge for you because they do become a bit uneven. So maybe looking at how those blocks could be made longer, so there's less of them, but then you have more opportunity for the gaps. I don't know, but there's many ways you can improve it. It's just going and looking at it and going, well, what is the key thing? Is it the width? Is it the surface, or is it both? And then it all comes down to you know, doing some work. Yeah.
Yeah, looks like
I see someone said that the term jaywalking is offensive, insulting to pedestrians. I totally agree. It's a kind of a word that's been ingrained into the public, and particularly when people want to use some kind of compliance term, and it is totally because we haven't got it right in terms of infrastructure, speed climbing, measurements. You know, I totally agree that we should ban it as a word.
Yep. Yeah, okay. Looks like there are not much questions left. So Hemant, are you online? Can you talk? Yeah, looks like he is still not here. So yeah, thank you, Jeanette, for your wonderful presentation. And a lot of people, I think, had something to take away from this presentation. And also, like the questions never ends. It's just started today. So you can just fire questions to me, and then we can try to figure out the best possible answer for the queries. Even I can just tap on Jeanette's shoulder to get the answer from in her interrupting her busy day-to-day schedule, which she doesn't mind. And so I think we will wrap up here. And Jeanette, you have good evening. And then for the rest of people, like there are a lot of people joining from abroad as well, some from India, Lebanon, and then yeah, so Middle East, I think. So everyone have a good day.
Right, thank you, Vishnu.